we won't continue in this vein for the rest of the workshop. First of all, I'd like to welcome, we have a new audience today for this part of the workshop. Have a streaming audience that's coming in from various parts of the world, and they'll be with us for this hour. Now, what I tried to do before lunch was to make some challenges to the history of individualism and the way in which we inherit not only a set of ideas about who we are, but also a whole set of institutions which reinforce or make real those ideas. So we didn't have an idea about rationality or rational thinking or knowledge in people's heads. It would be hard to justify public education. So by the way in which we do education, that is, we will teach you this you must know. It's to say we will implant the ideas in your head. We will evaluate those ideas and how well you've mastered them, and then you're finished. All right, so it just recapitulates or makes real yet again the whole individualist ideology or tradition. Now, how would you go beyond that? How could you get past it? How could we have a language to get past it? What would be, you might say, a relational language? Now, you have a lot of choices in some sense, inasmuch as there are a number of disciplines which have moved in one way or another, going back thousands of years into the contemporary world, with relational discourses. That is, you've got a whole discourse of Buddhism in which you more or less presume that there was a rising together, that the whole discourse we have of individuals is a construction. It's all built into the Buddhist tradition, and that meditation is a way of deconstructing and moving into this space of interbeing. And so there's a tradition. You also have a contemporary tradition, emerging tradition of physics, in which increasingly the emphasis is on relational relationship of me, the observer, and what I'm observing, the relationship of the whole atomic universe. You have another tradition coming out of ecological thinking, in which the whole attempt is to look at the whole of the world as an ecological system in which everything is related. So you've got those discourses. You also have a philosophic tradition. You've got a Heideggerian tradition trying to break down the distinction between me and the world, trying to break that subject-object dichotomy. It's a very difficult language to master, but it's there. Now, why not just borrow all that? And I'm not against that. I'll use all the discourses. But I guess what I've come to, in part, is to say, could we move within the constructionist frame? So that we stay in that frame, and use some of the resources we have from a constructionist dialogues, and particularly for me, and this is the Wittgensteinian part, do it in a way that we've got a usable language. That is something that we can put into action in our practices from everyday life, our organizations, on our clients, and our families, with our children. Because it's very difficult to take a discourse from physics and suddenly bring it into the living room and use it. So is there some other way of doing it? All right, so that's what I want to do. I don't want a Heideggerian language. It's too complicated. Who can do it with anything with it? I want a language that's what Chris Argyros would say is actionable as a language. Here's another choice I'm going to make, and that is that I don't want a new language. That is a totally new set of words, because that would require a whole mastery. And for example, I could say, well, look, we have a language which says I talk, now that parts, I'm an individual entity, and you listen, you as an individual entity. We don't have a term like tissen, where they are allied. And if we were to make an alliance language for everything, we have a whole set of new vocabulary terms, a whole set of mastery of new languages, which is probably not going to be very usable. I mean, this is, again, an option. So the way I've tried to do this is to say, let's take our ordinary language and rework our understanding of it and the practices in which it would be embedded. Take the language, shift it, change it, reconceptualize it, reconstruct it in such a way that the way we understand would be different, and the ways we'd use it would be different. I'll clarify that in a minute. So we have a language of around in English, 2,000 to 3,000 words for mental states. We'll go back to Descartes, I think. I mean, that's fundamentally defines who we are. But I think, I want, I wish, I hope, I dream, so on. I feel, and we live by that language. Those are living metaphors. We live by them. I say, how are you feeling today? What would you like to see happen next? What are you thinking about? And we just talk that way. How do you feel about me? I want to tell you what I feel about what's happened, blah, blah, blah. In a way, we are, in West anyway, we are psychological beings in the sense of creating an enormously rich compendium of states of mind. We have almost no language for the relationship. So could we convert the language of the individual into a language of relationship? So when I say I'm thinking, it doesn't mean there's a mental thing going on here that starts here. It means something else. So that's the adventure of the next 45 minutes. I'm going to start with a fundamental meaning, because from a constructionist standpoint, everything depends on the meaning of things. All right? It's not what there is in the raw, it's our interpretations or its meaning that counts. That's what we've all been through with all that we've done yesterday. And we create the meaning. But where is meaning? Now, in our tradition, meaning lies in the head. Right? What do you mean by that, we say? As if you mean something here and it's put into words. Or when we read a book, some books, and let's say a book in philosophy, we say, I wonder what this means, and we talk about it. What did the author mean by this? Read a poem. What is the meaning behind the poem? As if the poem itself doesn't mean anything. It's the meaning or intent of the author where the meaning lies. Huh? Now let me say, to go back to this issue of understanding we talked about before, if what I mean is in here, and the words are an attempt to tell you what I mean, you will never know what I mean. Right? Because I say something and say, what does that mean? I'll just give you some more words. What do they mean? I'll give you more words. I'll give you a kick in the butt. What does that mean? And if you can't get to the meaning behind the words except by more words or more actions. So let's not ask ourselves what it means in the head. Let's ask another question. What happens to it when I talk? Okay? Because I'm talking a lot. Boom, boom, boom. Most of you are not asking what it means, probably, but you are doing a lot of things with it. Some of you are off doing something else by now. You've got a lot of issues in your life, things that have happened. You're distracted. Yeah, you're sitting here, but I don't mean anything because I'm away. Some of you will have questions. That's not clear. It's murky. Some of you will say, look, that's wrong. It just doesn't add up. Not logical, not factual, blah, blah, blah. Some of you will find a bit of it interesting, maybe even a little bit of it inspirational. So what did it mean? Well, let me suggest it didn't mean anything until you did something with it. And what you did with it was a whole lot of different things. So I've got the words. Let's say these are my actions are there. But the actions themselves just sit there like nothing, like in the raw. They're just sounds in the atmosphere. They don't mean anything. And for those of you who were distracted by other issues, they just were sounds that disrupted your reverie. For some of you, those actions are questionable or murky. That's what they weren't clear or they're wrong. For others of you, they're interesting or even inspirational. So what I do in trying to make meaning, it has nothing in it. In itself, it's absent. It's only when you collaborate with it in some way, when you coordinate with it, with something I'll call a supplement. That is, you add something to it, you give something to it. You mark it as murky, questionable, interesting, factual, inspirational. You mark it through whatever it is you're doing with it. Which is to say, I don't mean anything until you bring me into meaning. If I mean anything to you, it's only by virtue of the fact that you've helped me to do it. If I've meant anything, I owe you a debt of gratitude for helping me into meaning. Okay? And yet, you couldn't supplement it without me. As you can't say I'm murky until I've done something. I mean, you can't just stand up and say, you're wrong, if I haven't spoken. So in order for you to be the judge of whether I was murky or wrong, I've allowed you and invited you to be that in a way. I mean, I've allowed you to come into existence as that person who makes things into something. So I ask, where is meaning? It's not in here, and it's not in you, it's in the collaborative action, what I'll call co-action. You can't locate it here, and you can't locate it there. You can't locate it in the entities. You can only locate it in the coordination. And once you've tried to locate it, that is to say, what it is we meant, you've already added a supplement which makes it something else, or makes it into something. So if you're doing interviews, for example, in a research study, you take the raw data of the interview and you make it into something. It wasn't there before until you made it into something. You've got a client who comes in and says, I'm depressed, to go back to a luncheon discussion. That client isn't depressed until you say, oh, well, why don't you tell me about that? Because you've already made it a depression by affirming that that has a meaningful, that's a meaningful event in itself. Or it's to say, you got a client, let's say, and again, to go back to therapy, comes in and says, look, I'm really just so depressed. It's like my husband has left me. I've got these teenage children, and they hate me. I got a boss. I'm going to be fired next week. I've got nothing to live for. I'm really depressed. Now, you're a psychiatrist. You give the person an antidepressant, which supplements it as being depression. If you say to the person, yes, I can see why you'd be depressed, let's go into some of those things a little more fully, it makes into a depression. What if you say, you know, I listened to all that you're saying, and it sounds to me like you are really angry. You're angry at your husband and your children and your boss. Let's talk about your anger. So it wasn't depression. It's now become something else. So whatever is said, you help it into being for what it becomes. Now, this is a continuous motion because, let's say in a dialogue, let's say when you comment after when I talk, you comment. I hear your supplement, but what does that mean? Well, it isn't going to get any meaning until I give it some. That is, I'm going to have to say things like, oh, well, you've got a good point, blah, blah, blah. I was totally wrong. Never say that. But, so the meaning never stays put. It's always kind of in motion awaiting the next coordinated move in the relationship. Now, this is not to say that meaning begins anew at every moment, because what we do is to come out of traditions where I say X and you say Y. And so you kind of know what you mean by virtue of the fact that you know about the tradition, you know about the collaborative action. All right? So if I accidentally run into you, all right, that's the first one, and you turn around, I say, I'm sorry. Okay? It's part of you recognize that. It's part of something we've done before, and you say, no, it doesn't matter. And we don't ask what all that meant. It's part of the set of collaborative actions, which have a tradition. And it gets its meaning by virtue of being in that tradition, and you know how it goes. So generally, you know how it goes, and you know what to expect in the way of a supplement. Which is to say, when you do these things often enough and long enough, they're like dances or games in which we know how the moves go. And we can just move along without asking about meaning. It just is the way we folks relate together. Coordinated actions. So let's ask about understanding. As I said earlier, we have a tradition in which to understand another person is to get to know their experience, what they feel, want, and so on, to get inside their head. But let me suggest again that if that's what we mean by understanding, we will never understand. Let's rework understanding. I'd look at it this way. I understand you when we are in coordination together. Coordination, understanding is a matter of a smooth coordination. So, if you say, look, I'm so sad today because my grandmother died, I say, I'm really so sorry about that. I know what you feel. Right? Understanding has occurred. We have done it. We've done the tradition of doing understanding. Not that I can get into your feelings or your neurons. We have done it as a relational performance. If you tell me, oh, I'm so sad today, my grandmother died, and I say, ah, screw that, let's have a beer. I'm like crude. I'm not listening. I'm I just am not an understanding or empathic person, because it's not in the form of the collaborative action in which we bring off understanding together. Together we create that which we will call understanding. Moving in a tradition, moving collaboratively. It also means that I don't have control in some way of who I am. As to go back to what you talked about just before lunch, your identity, professional identity, really depends on having a lot of people who do things like obey your orders and so on. But what if they didn't? I'm going to ask you to help me with a little bit.
Right now?
Yeah. All right, I got to tell you something else. This is a sidebar. If you're a constructionist, there's no right way to describe, explain, and so on. There's no language which is the right language. And both of us have used a lot of traditional academic language, scientific language, and in some way it grasps you by the throat. It's constrained, oblique, abstruse, obscure, and doesn't speak very well to anyone outside the club. So we say, why do we use that language? Why use the forms and traditions that we've inherited? Why doesn't scientific language, academy language, or organizational language use every possible form you can of saying or communicating? And so we experiment a lot with performance. And indeed, there's a book which I think is out there, which we have done, which collects a lot of these things. It's called Playing with Purpose, and which just summarizes, it shares a lot of this stuff. But anyway, it's to try to say, so we try to experiment from time to time with not telling about a set of ideas, but actually doing them. To give you another impact, makes you, another whole visceral response to it. And we're going to do it a couple times this afternoon. Maybe we'll get you to do it later on. All right, so I said, identity depends not on what I do, depends on what you do with it. The supplement. Okay, so the scene, office building, we're co-workers, same team. It's out in the hall, and this is Sarah, and I'm Tom, and I'm having a cup of coffee here, and Sarah's walking down the hall to her office, and I say, hey, Sarah, that's a cute outfit.
Well, thank you. That's the second compliment I've had today.
Oh, wow, that's great. Ain't I nice? Okay, try it again. Hey, Sarah, that's a cute outfit.
Are you ever going to give up? I mean, it's no, no, no.
All right. Hey, Sarah, that's a cute outfit.
I was going to say the same about you.
Whoa. We could go on with this, but you see the point. Who am I? This masher, this nice guy, this flirt, what am I? I don't know. Depends on what happens next, what she does with it. Now, what she does with it, now I'm in a corner. I've got to make something of that. I say, I didn't mean it that way, or blah, 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 whatever. Oh, yes, I meant it that way. But the identity keeps rolling as the next move comes on. All right. So any meaning we have, which is to say the basis of all we take to be real, true, and good, and so on, emerges from that coordinated or coactive scenarios. If you can get into that, let's move on to some other things. Oh, by the way, just for a moment, if you worry about the fact that you don't understand Bakhtin, it's not that you can't get in Bakhtin's head and find out what he really meant. He didn't have any meaning in there. It's not like the words he wrote were somehow not good representatives of a perfect interior rationality, which you've got to decipher in order to find out what Bakhtin meant. Bakhtin is writing in a tradition, and to understand it properly, within the tradition, you've got to say the things that people say in that tradition. All right? So don't feel bad about not understanding Bakhtin. It's like not being able to speak Chinese if you don't happen to be in China or know that language. It's a tradition of writing and relating which you're not part of. But it doesn't give that tradition ownership of Bakhtin. That is, they don't own that meaning, because Bakhtin just wrote all those words, and they don't come into meaning until you do something with them. And it just happens that a lot of people in a constructionist frame find in those words things which, phrases and so on, they can take out, extricate from the corpus, put them into another set of words, and they flower and speak almost, poetically and powerfully in ways that we can take on and use. Okay, let's try some other psychological states. Rework them now as collaborative states. So everything I say about mental, we're now going to make relational. Thinking, Descartes. Where did he come up with that idea he was thinking? Well, I mean, what did Descartes have? An eyeball that folded back into his head to see there was like a thinking stuff going on? Oh yeah, there's a thought. I must be thinking. I mean, where did he come up with that idea? It comes up in a tradition. If he says, I glooped and therefore I am, you know what to make of that. Nobody has that word glooped that I know of. It wouldn't mean anything, but he has to use a word you already recognize as being something in order to be able to say that. So he couldn't have known he was thinking outside of a tradition which gave him the term and could apply it to himself. So let's take that term and make it more public. I've got a student who writes a paper. I put in the margins, good thinking, like that thought, terrific thought. Well, I have no idea what in the world is going on in the mind of that student, in quotes. I mean, maybe it was a divine inspiration for all I know. I don't know. All I've got is the language on the paper. And if it's in the right tradition, if the sentences go from one sentence to another in what I would call a coherent way, and the first paragraph is more or less in agreement with the second paragraph, and maybe the second one builds on it, and the third paragraph shifts things in a way which add something new, good thinking. So what I'm doing is evaluating a tradition. I'm evaluating the ability of that student to participate in a tradition of which I'm a part based on my judgments within that tradition. Thinking then is not something that is your own. It's something that is a public resource, which you can do privately, and we often do. It It's like, what I mean by private here is simply public action not done fully. That is, in the quiet of one's chamber. When I'm sitting thinking about, let's say, what I'm going to write, what I'm doing is participating in some discursive actions, only I'm not talking them out loud. So yeah, I'm doing something that's private in the sense I'm not doing it aloud, but that doesn't make it my own thing, cut away from the public, not yours. You're already doing it. You are there with me. We are together in whatever I'm doing that we're called thinking. That's part of a collaborative process now done in the privacy of my chamber. Take memory. I remember, like we talk, memory loss. What do I mean by that? Or how well did you remember X, Y, or Z? Now, we usually look at that as a private psychological thing. We can study memory, study the process of memory. Huge research on the process of memory. But what do we mean by memory? Where is it located? Never been able to find it. No neurologist can find a memory. Well, let's look at memory not as something that's a cognitive individual process based in neurons, but as a public process based in the way in which we have come to talk together about things. And what we mean by memory is what we agree is a good memory. In the same way what we agree on rationality or reason. I mean, we have a child who goes to school for the first day, and you ask the child, dearest, what did happen today? And the child says, well, I put my left foot in front of my right foot, and my right foot in front of my left foot, and my left foot, and then I turned to my right, and I walked on my left foot in front of my right foot, and then I sat at my desk, and there was a pencil and a paper. I mean, you don't want that. It's not like, no, I mean, what really happened? I mean, you want a story. You want a narrative. You want something with a point. Did it go well, and how did it go well? Did your teacher like you, or you find new friends? Something that hangs on it, and you want the story. Oh, you met Susie, and she really liked your dress, and you became friends, and you want to see her after school. Well, that's a good story and a good memory. Not where you put your feet and what direction. So what we mean often by memory, not always because that term is used in a lot of different contexts, is the way you do things, how you do them. Eyewitness testimony, all right? You want to know what really happened on the night of August 3rd. And you are on the witness stand, and now you're to talk about your memory of August 3rd, all right? Very important, life or death matter. So, I as a witness, key witness, black, shot, run, crash. So, wait a minute, what happened? I don't want just words, I want to know what happened. Well, that's what happened. And it isn't going to fly. It will never be evidence for anything because it isn't a story. It doesn't have any story qualities to it. One thing isn't related to another thing. It's just words. That's not what we count as memory in a courtroom. You got to tell a story. It was a dark night, and I heard a shot ring out. I saw this person run and across the field, and they jumped in the car, and the car went down the road, and it crashed into a tree. Now that's a good memory. That counts as evidence. Why? Because it corresponds to a good story quality. So evidence in a courtroom, winning cases and losing cases is not about evidence in the raw. It's about evidence interpreted by virtue, in this case, of the story form. The battle between justice and injustice is a battle of stories in large degree. So memory, a way of relating that comes out of social practice, and we may do it alone, but we do it with others and doing it alone. Talk about, for a moment, experience. Now there's another one. My personal experience. We all agree we have experience, every one of us. But I don't know if any of us would agree what we mean by that. Or in fact, the very concept of experience has changed over time. I mean, you get John Locke who says, well, it's like a blank slate, and things just fill it up. So the mind and experience is like a mirror of the world. Now that's a view of experience, but that's a concept of what we mean by experience. We have a whole other range of views which says that no, experience is focal. It's like always selective. It does things. It's an activity. It creates. Here, by the way, just as a sidebar, here is in some way the constructivist move. I mean, many of you may know there's been a sort of a long-standing kind of antagonism between social construction and constructivism. Now, the term constructivism gets used in a lot of ways, but one of them is very individualist in the sense that I construct the world. So in my experience, I'm constructing the world in my terms. And we don't know what the world is really like because each of us is constructing it for what it is. All right? That was been a long-standing debate because for constructionists, there's a highly individualist and ends up in a solipsism. That is, it ends up with everybody so privately in their own world that we don't even know if each other exists outside of our own imagination. So ideologically and conceptually, we don't like it very much. Now, constructivists have changed, by the way. Most of them aren't there anymore. That's a radical view, and they've tried to incorporate a lot of social construction. So now it's a mixed, sort of one of these borderline cases where the journal on the constructivist psychology will have maybe 8 people on the editorial board are really social constructionists and so on. Anyway, put that aside. It's to say that whatever we mean by experience is discussable, it's negotiable. So let's look at it as social for a moment. Right? So what is my experience? Whatever it is that I'm calling my experience. Now look, I don't know pretty much, except for a couple of exceptions, what anybody here is wearing in the nature of shoes. You could be barefoot for all I know. Where am I focused? What is my experience? My experience is pretty much located right on your face. I look, eyes, mouth, eyelids closing, eyes open, smiles. I mean, and I live on that. It's like I'm constantly, if you're a person who's smiling, I'm probably going to look at you often to sort of keep myself going. Hey, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. Now, why is that? It's because whatever I'm calling experience is already in a social process in which what I'm doing depends on whether I feel you're joining me. What I got to do to keep you awake. But that's all a relational thing. It's all me involved with a relationship with you, and everything in my experience is pretty much going to be wrapped up with engaging in that tradition in an effective way. So I don't look at the shoes. I don't care. You know, as I say, it's like irrelevant. Not because I couldn't. It's just not in the tradition of what I'm doing. So is it possible that we could understand experience as largely coming out, whatever we're going to mean by it, of coming out of the relationships in which we exist? So that we learn to do things called experience. Or to say, and here's going to get sort of heavy here for a moment, what if most everything that I love, that I really appreciate about life, is the raw experience of beauty, of love, right, of sex, so on. Those raw experiences are not raw experiences. They're all experiences that come out of a set of relationships of which I've been a part. They've sort of teased me in to a whole way of being in which those things are really fantastic. I mean, if you can look at it one way, you might spend a lot of money on a good bottle of wine or a single malt scotch. You know, a bottle of single malt scotch. Wow, yes, I would do that. This stuff is terrible. I mean, if you were a teenager and you pick up a single malt scotch, or say you're 6 years old, and now we'll spend infinite amounts of money on a Bordeaux from 1968 or something. Now, where did all that come from? It came from a whole set of relationships. Try this. Oh, this is really fine. Oh, put the candles on. Have a fire going. Come in out of the cold. Taste this. It's fantastic. It'll take your breath away. All that saying and doing and being with, which makes that really fantastic. I took children to the Alps when they were 4 and 6, thinking, oh, this will be fantastic to see the majesty of the Alps and the sunset over the mountains. They couldn't be bothered. They had games to play. They were picking up things in the rock. They were, bothering each other. I say, fantastic. Couldn't be bothered. So to be fantastic, it's required something. It's got a whole set of relationships of which that's come to be fantastic. Now here's where it gets a little edgy. What about pain? Pain, isn't that just raw? You know when you're in pain? Now this is not unimportant medically, because there's an enormous amount of medical expense in the United States that's spent on pain management. Major pharmaceutical and other industries depend on pain management, all looking at it as a totally biological problem. But to what extent is it biological? Is it possible, and just push it here, how much of it is biological? I mean, we have a friend who plays rugby. Right? That guy comes in after an afternoon, he's got bruises, he's like bent over like this, he's got blood on his face. Fantastic afternoon. One of the best afternoons of my life. Somehow in the process of the game and winning, and your pals saying, and you laugh about your bruises, and you say, God, I really give that guy a belt, and he gave you one back, and we had a great time. I mean, the whole thing about pain begins to become something else. How far can you press that? Could pain management, and again, the Buddhists get into this very much. I mean, part of the sort of mindfulness training is a matter of putting the pain into a tradition in which it becomes something else. Again, it's a relational process to manage something which would otherwise, in the common vernacular, be painful. Okay, I will do one more, and then maybe we can stop. stop this part of the process and have some open, well, maybe we'll divide up in discussion groups. But well, let's do one more. Emotions. We all learn this. Like, maybe there are 9 basic emotions, and they're built in biologically. Fear and anger, part of the hypothalamic system. These are all built in. You need them in a Darwinian sense. Evolution has provided us with a basic set of emotions. And we can study them, and people do, thousands of dollars on now the neuro basis of emotions and so on. Well, where did we ever get the idea that we're emotions? Not every culture has that concept. Emotion. And what do we mean by it? Well, it's difficult to know what you mean by it. If I ask you, what is an emotion, you're going to have a hard time telling me. Really hard time. Is a sneeze an emotion? Is surprise an emotion? And you say, well, I don't think so. Well, why not? What's your criterion? You're going to have a hard time with that criterion. And indeed, sneezes and emotions were in vocabularies of emotion 100 years ago. So the vocabulary changes. Is anxiety an emotion? Well, we didn't have anxiety basically as a thing until roughly the 20th century sometime. It was fear and anger, but anxiety? What was that? So we construct the emotions, you might say. But we know they're there, okay? Obviously, emotions are there and we see it all the time, but where are they? Are they not in the public sphere? Are they not forms of performance? Let's try a couple things. Okay. Emotions, I'm going back to neuro for a moment, are biologically built in. And we can identify when they exist by, let's say, looking at brain scans. And ultimately, we will unlock the secret of emotions by virtue of knowing about brain neurology. And now let's buy that as a topic. Okay, let's believe it. We're now a futurist family. We have bought in to the notion of emotions as brain products. So we're at the dinner table, and you can be Carol, I'll be Bob, and Carol says to me, it was right after dinner, we're having our coffee.
Bob, we've been together now for quite a few years, and things are really nice and we get along fine, but sometimes I just ask myself, do you really love me?
Do I really love you? Well, we just finished dinner and my heart's racing a little bit from digesting. I'm not in a good way to gauge that at this moment. But look, on Tuesday I've got my annual physical. And I will ask Dr. Zener if maybe he could do a brain scan, and we'll find out.
Oh, well, what a good idea. I'm so glad. But do you think just one test is enough?
Well, now there are about 4 or 5 different technologies for brain scan, and some of them are good for this and some of them are good for that. So, yeah.
It might be expensive.
It might be expensive. $10,000 one brain scan. It's like 4 brain scans. That's our savings.
Yeah, I don't think insurance will cover any of that.
None of it. No, they don't care.
No.
So
still, should we buy that second house? Should we, plan together our retirement? Should we just go off on our own and start again? What should we do?
Well, look, we got to spend the money, but there's another question here. All right, so what if we find out? Maybe we do find out I really love you, but what about you?
What about me? Yeah. I mean, do you even care what I feel? I mean, that's what
I don't know yet, but I'll find out.
But we won't have any money left.
Well, that's true.
If you love me, let's just say that's good enough.
No, we've got to know it both ways. And look, and look, if we find out that I love you, and we find out you love me, do you think we can have sex again?
That's a very old-fashioned scenario, isn't it? Yeah.
All right. Well, let's look at emotions then, not as something that's carried by the brain, but it's something that we know how to do by virtue of relating within a culture, relating within a tradition. And you got to be part of that tradition to do it. Try another one. One more.
Okay.
All right. Come on. I'm now Fred.
Fred.
Okay.
And I'm Dr. Brown. You know, I've been sent here by your company to help you a bit with your career. There's been a 360 evaluation of you, and it seems that everyone generally feels that you really do not express your emotions very well. No one seems to know where you stand, and I'm not sure. I mean, they say you've got a great future here if this is resolved, but maybe people are jealous of you, maybe some people wish you ill, and so I need to find out for myself what kind of emotional expression you have. Are you with me here, Fred? Good. Now, I want you to imagine something. They say cognitively you're quite good. So imagine your teenage son has taken your car that you like, and he has taken it without permission, and he had an accident. He ran into a tree. He smashed the whole front of the car. He's okay, but the car is not. And he's been hiding from you, avoiding you. But suddenly, here he is, right in front of you. What do you say to him?
Peter, I'm very angry. I'm very angry.
That's it? That's it?
Yeah, Peter, I'm very angry.
Okay, all right. We have a bit of work here. Let's try this. When people are angry, generally they have kind of a forceful voice, some volume. Could you try that? Same line, volume.
Peter, I'm very angry!
Okay, for someone of your size and age, I think a lower register, the volume good, register lower. Try again, please.
Peter, I'm very angry.
Okay, all right, good. That's good. You're a quick learner, just like they said. But now, expression. Yes, that's a good one right there. That's sort of, no. Keep the eyebrows down. Keep the face serious. Yeah, good. All right, now, let's hear your remark again, please.
Peter, I'm very angry.
Excellent. Now, it's not just the head. The body is involved too. Let's have some body involvement added on now. Try again.
Peter, I'm very angry.
That's a unique interpretation. But in our culture, generally, it's more, not so much a side movement as more of a forward, maybe fist clenched, or you don't hit him, but you threaten him in a way. Okay? Forward motion. Try again.
Peter, I'm very angry.
That's very good. You're a good learner.
Oh, I'm so happy. All right, so look at it as a performance. To do it, you've got to really get into it. It's not and it may not be fake in the sense that you know it's a performance. You're fully involved. It's like doing that slam dunk. You're not saying, well, that's just a performance, so it didn't count. it counts. And it counts with my whole body. It's like fully authentic. I'm fully there if I'm usually. All right, so to do it has got to be done within a cultural frame, and it can't be done anywhere. I just can't go up to my son. We have now a case where he's done something which I can say I'm very angry. Now, if Peter's gone out to my car and washed it, I can't say, I'm very angry. What sense would it make? He's got to have wrecked it. And it makes sense. So what you can be angry at depends on a whole set of cultural agreements about what is allowed for you to be angry. And you can't do it any time and any place. There's specific times when it can be done, and in fact when it should be done, or otherwise you're looked at as a wuss or something. So you've got to do it right, and at the right time, and at the right place, as prescribed by the cultural traditions of which you're a part. Now look at the whole dance. Now put this back with an action supplement. I can do it out of a tradition, but it doesn't necessarily stay anger again until you do something with it. And you can say, you're not really angry. You look like your dad now. Make light of it. Or make it into something else. Make it into a part. But usually there are certain kinds of things you can do. So if I'm angry at you, you don't have every choice in the dance. If you apologize, which is one possibility, I'm angry at you for doing something, like you wrecked something, took something, stole something, whatever, you can apologize. And the dance, if I accept an apology, which I may not quite yet, is over. We've done this. You did something wrong, I do anger, you apologize, I accept apologies because you're not going to do it again, and it's finished. You can, however, say, look, it's not warranted that you have anger. I didn't really do anything. You misunderstood my actions. I wasn't stealing that from you. I was trying to hide it so somebody wouldn't take it, or I just wanted to borrow it or something. So you shouldn't be feeling anger. So you reconstruct the situation so that it's not anger. Or at least you stop. Or you don't accept the reconstruction. And so we're saying it's like a set of scenarios of like, you do this, I do this. Reconstruction is one of them. Another one is you can be angry at me in return. This is very common. I blame you. You did this. You weren't right. You did this wrong. And you say, well, I wouldn't have done it wrong if you had really told me what I was supposed to do right. Because you weren't here when I had to face this situation. So it's like we all do that. It's like, that's a good, you attack me like that, I'll attack you back. We all know it's not biological, it's cultural. So now we've got a problem, because usually those sorts of scenarios escalate. Those are difficult scenarios to escape. Anger, again, with anger coming back, boom, the other one coming back. Now, after about 3 of those moves, it's a little bit difficult to get back to okay. You can ruin an afternoon with somebody you care about with about 3 or 4 of those moves. But they are moves. It's a scenario. You don't have to do them. They're like traditions. They're like dances that we've engaged in that are so natural now that we don't know what else to do. So here's the question for, let's say, therapists, or indeed for international relations. How could we do those dances differently that are killing us? If somebody attacks, is our only natural response the counterattack? Is that it? Is that our only possibility? How can we escape those traditions of continuous mutual violence? And that's a creative effort. It's like creating new scenarios for the future. It's like we become the creators then, the potential creators for different kinds of scenarios, for those which just don't do well and from which we suffer. We don't have to live them. We develop other options. That's the creative part of constructionism. Okay, I'm going to stop this now. You guys think you've got enough? You can see how all this goes. And what I'd like to do maybe for a few minutes is let's sort of pull around into groups of 4 or 5. Okay, just here, not go back to the tables. And the challenge here is just to see what comes from this. Where do you take it? If this is the beginning of a conversation, where would you like to go with it? What makes sense? What doesn't make sense? Where would you apply it? Where do you fill it out? What needs more explanation?
Are you talking about the whole past
Yeah,
hour?
the whole past hour. So you can just whip around here, make a small subgroup here of 5 or 6 people, and maybe you could pull around here, and just pull around this group so there's a small mass. And yeah, just bring it around so.
I guess you can take up the microphone now.
Oh.
Yeah, stop it, I think they should.
I haven't stopped it yet. I'm going to stop it now. Yeah, it went really well. Okay. It was perfect the whole time.